Network India and World Resources Institute India. Before we start today's session, there are just a few housekeeping items. The duration of today's session is 45 minutes, and I'll leave it up to the moderator to tell us how many minutes will be questions. The audience is on listen-only mode. So you can put your questions in the Q&A box by Media Network India and World. And you should, sorry, had a bit of an echo there. So the audience will be in listen-only mode. You can put your Q&A at a box that you can see at the bottom of your screen. If you are not in the Zoom meeting room, but you are watching on a live stream on either YouTube, Book My Show, the Quint, or any other streaming service, you will not be able to ask questions from the panelists. We would welcome you to join us on the app. So it's the Attendify app. Look for Charcha 2020, join us on the Zoom links, and we would be happy to speak with you. With this, I'm going to hand it over to Lubena, and I would request all the panelists to please switch on their videos. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'll just share my screen. Okay. If you can also hand over the screen to me. Hi, everyone. I'm Lubaina Rangwala from the World Resources Institute. I work with the urban development team and have been working on community-based resilience over the past few years.
Yeah, you should be able to screen share now. Great.
Okay. Just a minute. Yeah. So I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to share some of the highlights of our work on community resilience to set the tone for our conversation today. So far, we've worked in 3 countries, India, Indonesia, and Brazil, and have established that city resilience plans will fail short if policies, plans, and physical interventions do not adequately represent the needs of the most vulnerable people in our societies. This is a site and services scheme from Surat in Ugat, where community members constantly deal with issues of waterlogging and severe floods every year. And every year they come together and invest in pre-monsoon preparedness activities like paving their roads, paving their roads, cleaning drains, waterproofing their roofs, etc. And every year they face income losses due to waterlogging and not being able to reach their work. This is another community we worked in, Morarji Wasahat, the slum settlement in central Surat, facing similar issues of where sorry, one of my panelists is not being able to get. Rashi, can you, I'm like multitasking that. Can you just...
Yes, definitely. Who is this?
Nalini from Sirudala. She's somehow not being able to...
I'll speak with her. Thank you. You can go ahead.
Thank you so much. So sorry, what I was saying is, so this is Morarji Wasahat, the second community we worked in, where residents have actually built up their thresholds and otlas, as they call them in Gujarat, to prevent water from entering their home. This is from Semarang, a fishing community called Tanjung Mas in Semarang, Indonesia, where residents have built these bridges across the settlement to get around in areas that are most exposed to coastal flooding. They've propped up their homes on stilts, and all of this sort of investment every year is being done by people coming together and making interventions in their communities. To make the point that residents are constantly investing in adaptation actions to deal with these recurrent shocks and stresses. And they're the only ones who are sort of building this resilient infrastructure in their communities, as best without the kind of technical knowledge and support that one should have, and not really calling it resilient infrastructure. Also that these practices or social and financial capital can actually be integrated in slum improvement schemes or other sort of organized efforts in low-income communities. So, making this point, but also highlighting that these activities in our work was seen primarily around visible climate risks like flooding, sea level rise, landslides, but very little kind of collective action in both Surat and Semarang and Brazil as well, where residents spoke of coming together around invisible risks like heat, for example. There were very few collective, in fact, literally no collective measures. Most of the measures were comfort measures like we drink more water or use shading devices, try to keep ourselves less exposed, etc. So it's also to sort of point to the fact that as a city, there is a deficit of knowledge around invisible risks like heat. And so we end up with built forms like this is Kosadavas, a massive slum rehabilitation colony in Surat, where 19,000 households from across Surat were rehabilitated in this settlement here. And our surveys have shown that people found, despite from the routine waterlogging in their homes, but were now subjected to stifling levels of indoor heat and humidity. In fact, one resident shared that he has never experienced this kind of indoor heat as he does now in the fourth floor apartment in Kosadavas. So this is also to say that heat risk remains as an invisible risk in our cities, and most community members manage this risk through localized measures, but rarely through collective action, and therefore almost never this sort of never aggregates as clear mitigation strategies that can influence the built environment and regulatory and policy mechanisms around it. Our third important finding from COSAD again is that these communities were actually very weak in social ties because the lottery system of relocation had severed social ties and with neighbors, political and social institutions in the places that they lived in before here, which left them with no kind of acumen to collectively come together and organize around these kinds of issues. And most of our sort of engagements were grievances and kind of led to conversations around safety and security in the neighborhood, and very little on disaster preparedness or climate resilience. This message is further kind of attested in our recent work, most recently in Kerala and Kochi, where social networks at state and city level are so well established as routine work for them. So you have networks like Asha workers, communities on an every basis and have local knowledge of their needs and challenges, and can immediately develop localized strategies during disaster or crisis situations, like the one we're facing today with COVID-19, where Kerala has slowly emerged as a quote unquote best practice in India. So and then there are so many examples of ill-informed policies, guidelines, and containment strategies across most of our Indian cities that are based on very little knowledge of the ways in which marginal and vulnerable communities and people live, and has led to one of the largest migrant exoduses that we're seeing in our cities today. So this message is basically to emphasize the importance of community engagement, and is sort of amplified in most of the work that our speakers today will bring on the table, and to say that community engagement is essential in designing long-term resilience and response strategies. So without further delay, I'd like to actually start our panel discussion and introduce speakers. My first speaker was Nalini, but I'm not sure. Okay, she's on. It says she's on.
Yes, I'm on.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Sorry, you had trouble signing in. So Nalini, Miss Nalini Shekhar, co-founder of Hasiru Dala, a community-based organization that works closely with the waste worker community. So today Nalini is going to speak about organizing marginal workers in our cities and present examples that speak to the challenge of aid dispersal for organized versus not very well organized labor in the city. So over to you, Nalini. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, and happy that this conversation is happening. And I think many of us, what I'm going to speak, many of us have experienced in different cities. It's not going to be something new, but some reflection of what we have done. And yesterday, I was talking to waste workers from Latin America of different countries, and their situation has not been very different from ours. So Hasiru Dala is an organization that organizes waste pickers. We have about 12,000 members. And during the COVID situation, we were able to raise up to the occasion to support the waste workers just beyond waste pickers. And about in Bangalore, about 10,000 people were serviced. In addition to that, we service a lot of migrant population, and a total of 60,000 families we provided 1 month ration. So it's almost 100 tons, 1,000 tons of material was used to support 60,000 families. So with that background, I wanted to share the kind of work we were able to do with waste pickers and also non-waste pickers who were not organized. And city did not know where these migrants lived. We kind of knew this is a labor camp, there is a lot of people here, but that is it. And also citizen raised up to the occasion. Both the government did not know where their workers were, neither did we know where all our workers were. So and workers did not trust us because we did not reach the aid in time. For example, yesterday, after doing 60,000 households, we continue to do it. And yesterday I saw a man sitting and eating the leaf litter on the street because he didn't get anything. So where are we? What are we doing? And how many people are there? We have no idea. If you just look at our own services, waste pickers, we knew how many people were on the prescription medicine, how many people were pregnant, how many people are lactating mothers, and we knew how many children are more vulnerable than the others. So we were able to give not only ration kit, we were able to provide hygiene kits, we were able to provide prescription medicine, we were able to give them high protein food. Our experience in the past with the demonetization time, because waste pickers and waste industry runs on the cash flow, that time we had seen a lot of children going malnourished within a week. So we didn't want to have. We had women also weighing 24 and 28 kilos. So we had that previous experience and knowledge. So we immediately jumped onto it and then started providing them high protein kits. So this we were able to do because we knew our community, we knew where they lived and what they are, and our connection was them. They trusted us, we trusted them. But when we served another 50,000 migrants, that was a big challenge because we did not know where they live, what kind of food. In fact, in Bangalore, we have a lot of migrants even in waste picker community. So we were able to even go to the minute detail of, I will give him this particular family masoor dal and boiled rice. By the other family, I give jowar ka atta and green gram. The other people will give you tur dal and rice because of the level of information we had. While all the other 50,000 we did, okay, rice, dal, and of course we gave a good quantity, 25 kilos for a month. But we did not service any other need for them because we didn't know whether they came from Odia or Bihar or Bengal. So there was a huge difference in the kind of services we were able to provide waste pickers and non-waste pickers. Some of our funders said waste pickers are privileged. We said we want everyone to be privileged, not just waste pickers. So that was a huge thing that we saw in the aid distribution itself. Because we knew our community, we were able to do more. Other people we did not know, we gave the common information and common things that we could give. We also gave a lot of things with children, with the information on COVID and Kannada and Hindi, but we couldn't do that with the other people because we didn't know how many children were there. That was one of the things. The second thing we have seen, there's a rush to get into the trains. They have to go because they don't feel comfortable here. We have not made them welcome. So there is a rush to go. And yesterday, from last 1 week, we are just doing a lot of research and asking all our waste picker how many people want to go back so that we can help them to get the train. Not one single person wanted to go back. So this shows organizing, connecting them, and access to livelihood and dignity of labor. In Bangalore, people, we call them, entrepreneurs. We call them silent environmentalists. So the language that we use is very different and dignified. So I think this is one example I can share with you what is happening right now. Thank you, Livia. Libina.
Thank you, Nalini. This was really informative to kind of know what is happening on the ground. I will invite my next speaker, Namrata Kapoor from the Indian Institute of Human Settlements in Bangalore. Her current research, Namrata, if you could get your, hi. Namrata's current research looks at the effect of financialization of land on the production, construction and consumption of housing in Indian cities. She will speak about her recent collaborative work with the Doctors for You Foundation and IIT Mumbai that establishes an association between the poor conditions of natural light and ventilation in slum rehabilitation buildings, SRA buildings in Mumbai, and the spread of tuberculosis among its residents. Thank you for joining us, Namrata. Over to you.
Thanks, Lubina. So like Lubina just said, I'm going to speak to you about the study that we completed last year, which proves a sense of association between architectural parameters and the spread of tuberculosis in the resettlement colonies. Now, what does this exactly mean? Let me just elaborate on this. Our study mapped 3 resettlement colonies in the ME Sword, and it's important that we say that these are resettlement colonies. All the residents in these colonies were project affected people, so they sort of came from the same socioeconomic backgrounds and had similar eating and food habits. So we studied 3 of these resettlement colonies and found that there were 2 resettlement colonies that had up to 10% of households suffering from tuberculosis, and 1 resettlement colony that had less than 1% rate, 1% households suffering from tuberculosis. And so when we further dug into these cases, what we found is that the 2 resettlement colonies that had very high cases of tuberculosis were built using slum redevelopment norms. And the 1 resettlement colony that had less than 1% tuberculosis households was built using general regulations. Now, what does this mean? Anybody who's from Mumbai knows that buildings that are built under the slum redevelopment regulation have relaxed norms. The government is trying to fit in as many people on as small a land parcel as possible, because that kind of is the more efficient use of land in that manner. And for that, what they have done is they have relaxed the conditions of the distance between the 2 buildings. So the buildings are built much closer to each other, and they are much higher in density as compared to the buildings that are built out of general regulations, which are not built under the slum redevelopment laws. Just to give you an example of how close, like the distance between 2 G+7 buildings for general regulation under the 1991 norms is supposed to be 16 meters. So between 2 buildings, you have 16 meters of space. In the slum redevelopment regulation under the 1991 norms, that distance is reduced to 3 meters. So you can understand that the flats which are on the ground floor get absolutely no light and ventilation. And we were studying these three set of buildings, and what we found is that there is a positive sense of association, that buildings that have bad conditions of light and ventilation because of the SRA norms have a higher spread of TB. And it's important to note that 80% of the people who got TB after they came into these resettlement colonies. So it is not, so there is that kind of link as well. Okay, so now why am I talking about this case study in the section on community engagement? And that's because I want to talk to you about the role of Doctors for You Foundation in actually setting up the study. Who are the Doctors for You Foundation? Doctors for You Foundation is an NGO that works with disaster relief management. I think they're about 13 years old. And they have been working in the ME SWAT since at least 12 years now. And the way in which this works is they've been working in providing TB relief through the DOTS program. They are the sort of external private NGO partner in this TB relief work. And so the way in which this works is that a government hospital will tell a TB patient that you have tuberculosis, and then they are assigned a health post, and some of the health posts are coming to Doctors for You workers. The health workers of the Doctors for You are also people who live in this community, and so they have a very close idea of understanding, the community and their kind of, their apprehensiveness, or they know them at an intimate level in that manner. So the Doctors for You health workers saw this spatial pattern. They recognized this spatial pattern, and they set up the study after recognizing the spatial pattern. They roped in IIT to, scientifically measure the architectural parameters. They roped me in to kind of talk about the problems with the urban design regulation, with the urban regulations for building SRA buildings. And individually, in our capacities as urban planners and as people who are architects, have been crying hoarse about this. But this sense of association with tuberculosis is a very important cog in this, because as architects and urban planners, we would not have been able to kind of establish this. But their embeddedness in providing the DOTS programs in these neighborhoods actually helps them recognize the spatial pattern. Also, sort of a shout out to the MMR EIS grant that actually facilitated this this interdisciplinary study to take place. The data that was used to kind of talk about the number of TB cases in all three colonies was the Doctors for You data, and this is also an important thing. They've been recording this data for the last 12 years, and what is sort of important here is that we know how government health posts and governments can get very cagey about sharing this data, and you can see how Doctors for You having their own data helps facilitate do this study. And it's very good that, especially in the current environment, to also be able to triangulate data through this community engagement, community embedded NGO like Doctors for You. The third thing I want to talk to you about is that when we sort of released the results of this study, at that point in time, people asked us, like, what are we supposed to do about it? And really speaking, there's very little you can do once the buildings have been built, right? Like these are, to give you an example, these are about, each resettlement colony has about 4,800 households. So these are large colonies. And so the kind of, suggestions that were being given at that point in time were to sort of put ventilators and, somehow improve the airflow within each of these households. But some activists sort of like accused us by saying that, oh no, you should actually be saying that this entire colony needs to be like pulled down, very Stuart Igo style. Yeah, just one, I'm just wrapping up. Yeah. And what happened is that the Doctors for You people said that, no, you cannot be suggesting something like this because, you have the trust of the people. And what if they do not get their housing back after it is pulled down? And there is a certain kind of like ethical commitment that you have when you're working as an embedded um, sort of NGO, and that's what I just wanted to highlight these things: the availability of the data, the kind of pattern recognition, spatially, and the kind of ethical sort of commitment to the embedded community that you're working within is important from their perspective.
Great. I think this is an incredible example and really sort of builds our argument further. I will now request Dr. Desai to come on. Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
Dr. Desai, she's the Honorary Technical Director of the Urban Health and Climate Resilience Center for Excellence in Surat. In fact, UHCRC under Dr. Desai's leadership is our partner in Surat. We did all this great work in Surat with them. So just wanted to say that. The center focuses on issues of public health in the city and its most vulnerable communities. She will today talk about the importance of routine engagement in vulnerable communities through social networks such as the ASHA workers, Anganwadis, and urban health centers in Gujarat in providing long-term urban health services and amenities in Surat city. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you.
Okay, I will try to link the previous three speakers' points also when I talk about Surat. Surat is special because it has faced several threats, several disasters, and has come out. It's a real resilient city as far as the infrastructure and the economy is concerned. But same is not very true for health. And it all depends on how we define health and how we look at health. Coming to one of the comments before I go to some of the points which they are linked otherwise. Lubaina talked about Kerala and said the community is prepared and community is involved and active and there is ownership of community. Looking at the population structure of Kerala and Surat, other than literacy, which is always very high in Kerala, is they have 10% migrants. Surat city has 50% migrants. And when there are predominant migrants, poor migrants, the ownership of the city and the engagement of people in any program is a challenge by itself. Second is the Bangalore experience of working NGO, very effective NGO working with direct, because government learns from the NGO's enthusiasm and try to build up a model in the service sector. But then what we cannot introduce, I am an ex-government officer and continuously working as NGO also. What I have understood is what we cannot install or copy paste amongst our workers is enthusiasm and commitment to serve the poor. And that's where the challenge lies, in addition to other challenges which were discussed. The third is a tuberculosis case, which also I would like to mention about, because for 2 days only I had a engineers alumni associations interaction with them, and I said housing is the nearest environment for all. Our teaching and our practice both have a challenge, and that's where we need to focus. So the health is also health should be part of the planning when housing is planned. Coming to again Surat scenario, we studied public health resilience of Surat city and all municipal corporations of Gujarat. And what emerged is migration and poverty are the challenges for urban health vulnerability. And we need to attend to that. And how to attend that needs a lot of discussion and deliberations. Another important thing is how do we define health? I remember one of the commissioner of municipal corporation, not of Surat, told, when I said, sir, what do you think your health problems are in your city? He said, don't talk about tuberculosis, malaria, which is everywhere. I am facing problem of road accidents. I am facing problem of suicide. I am facing problem of poisoning, and these are the urban problems which also needs to be attended. Surat being a good health system compared to other cities because it was built up earlier looking at its challenges. Um, but when we analyze the public health vulnerability of all municipal corporation and compared, what emerged is Surat stood somewhere in middle, and why Surat was in middle was because of its socio-demography. So health has several dimensions. In fact, health is a biological element which is influenced by several factors which includes environment, climate, economy, and even the socio-economic. Of health services is all health services in Surat evolved with the challenges which emerge, health challenges which emerge in the city. We saw the health challenges with spurt in the population, and that spurt was not due to birth rate, but it was due to migration. So migration is determined by economic activity and also, and that's why we started with filariasis, which was more a climatic origin because of the humidity, because of the non-availability of drainage. So that is environmental factor also. Then came malaria, then came the HIV/AIDS, then came the dengue and other challenges, and now we are facing the problem of corona. Surat stands second in Gujarat for this problem. So the continuous threats coming up in the city, including plague and leptospirosis, has built up a system which is more need-based, but it is still lacking in what is required. And these are some of the things which I would like to mention hurriedly. One is, so it is said that urban health is, as I mentioned earlier, is a biological element, but urban health is on 4 strong pillars, and that includes um, engineering, enforcement, education, and engagement of the population. And the fourth one is the one which is a challenge when you have a population which doesn't consider city as their own, but they are part of the city. And then they have their own limitations because of poverty, illiteracy, and other pressing demands. And that's why they continue to work with that. So we have a structure under National Urban Health Mission, providing support to the urban health system, which is a primary healthcare to tertiary healthcare. And we have workers like Asha, which is for urban, is Usha, urban social health activist, Anganwadi workers. We also have a system of Mahila Arogya Samitis in the urban poor area, and we have CBOs and NGOs working in the city. So there is some structure which is a link between community and between service providers or the urban health system in the city. And what is observed is the preventive services are the domain of government programs or government system, and curative services still remains a domain of private sector. That is the challenge for the
Ma'am, if you can conclude
city.
your talk.
To the challenges which are faced and which should be solved. One is the intersectoral convergence, because health is an outcome and is not an independent entity. So all departments, decentralization, real decentralization of the activity. Public-private partnership is a strong element for Surat medical practitioners and needs to be promoted in every city. Disaster preparedness is a challenge like corona. When your routine is weak, you cannot suddenly come up with the interventions for the emergencies, and that's where the challenge lies. Um, what is required is the planning, which should include health. Every planning should include health focus, should have a child friendly focus, women friendly focus. Ultimately, it should be human friendly focus, and that's where we all need to work. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Um, I'd like to now invite Sitaram Schiller from Director of the Center for Promoting Democracy. Sitaram, if you can put on your camera and your mic. Thank you. So
Can you
this,
hear me?
yes, we can hear you. Hello.
Or something gone wrong?
Yeah, so I'll just introduce. So the Center for Promoting Democracy focuses on strengthening systems of urban governance, highlighting the importance of diversity, dissent, tolerance, collective decision-making, and participative institution building in Indian cities. He will close our panel today with sharing his work on on the community participation bill and the need to institutionalize community engagement through local governance systems like area sabhas in Mumbai. So over to you, Shita. Thank you so much.
So, yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So what we seen? I'll take a case of Mumbai to uh, share some observations. What happened in Mumbai after this COVID thing, and that is one means one observation is started how community responds to it. And when I'm saying the communities, I'm talking about means two sectors. One is the homeless population and the migrant workers, and another one is the informal settlements and the people in living in a formal settlements. So in a homeless population, they homeless and migrants, they're actually not recognized as the citizens in the cities. So administration is not really much concerned about them, and then they were really thinking what to do with them. But finally, first time the Mumbai Municipal Corporation and Maharashtra government is decided to take care of the homeless population, and they started some initiative. They formed a group of coordination, and they invite civil society organizations who can actually provide relief to them, and then they started providing relief. From the day one, the organizations like us were telling them that don't provide them food or don't provide, means there is no need of the shifting them to anywhere, but provide them the health facility and the food grains. But corporation and other administration also, even the collector office, was not really keen to do that. And finally, after 2 months, now they are thinking about it. But that is what the homeless population is. And the migrants, means we know the stories of the migrants, but these two populations are not the voters, so not the recognized by the political parties and the political powers, as well as not recognized by the administration. In an informal settlement and in a formal settlements, how then people, and now how the people are responding to it. So what people are doing, so people are actually, they are getting organized, and they are trying to get help from the administrative infrastructures. Like they are approaching health posts for the health needs, the testings, and that kind of things. They are approaching the corporators for getting the food and food grains. So that kind of, and they are approaching the health post staff, which is in Bombay, it is known as the community health volunteers. So that, and taking their help, they are approaching the Safai Kamgars who are cleaning their communities, and they are trying to sanitize their communities with their help, and they are also accessing the ration and all that kind of a facilities. But same time, they are taking the control now in their hand, because there is no any elected representatives or any administrative officials are not actually giving them a trust or a confidence that they will come in a support in this kind of a situation. So communities are taking lead now. They are getting organized. They are running the community kitchens. They are taking the precautions that they are doing that this okay, this gully will be managed by this group of volunteers, and they are using that okay. uh, so how many household? Around 100 or 150 household. So every need of these household will be conveyed to these volunteers, and these volunteers will try to get a relief, and they try to buy things. So I think this is how they are trying to organize themselves and taking a precaution from the COVID virus. And other thing is, they are also, if someone is having a issues of health, and they are approaching the health centers, they are approaching the ambulances, as well as they are exploring the support. So they are approaching the political parties, they are approaching the NGOs, they are approaching the other institutions who can provide them support. So they are preparing the list of the needful communities, they are preparing, and they are doing this work. They are doing they are facilitating this relief thing. I think that they are creating awareness about the uh, what is the impact of the COVID among that pockets of themselves. This is what the decentralized governance they are creating of their own. This is one governance, and there is another infrastructure of the governance, and that can be easily formalized, and that is very simple. But that is the discussion we are having from 1972 till now, and we finally had this discussion in our parliament. And in 1991, we passed the 74th constitutional amendment. And this 74th constitutional amendment was talking about decentralization. And through decentralization, they are talking about the accountability and transparency. But around 25 years now, completion of this decentralization mission. Meantime, all the NGO and civil society organizations like us were thinking, okay, people participation is the way, people participation is the way. Many other, many government institutions and programs, uh, they use this term like people participation and people participation, ladder of people participation, and many efforts are done. But I must say that there was no heart, there was no agreement of the political class and administration to decentralize the systems in a urban areas. It happens good in a rural areas, in a panchayati raj system, but it is not happening with that effort in urban areas. And why that is not happening? Because when we are saying that decentralization is needful, then we are arguing that okay, why? So we are saying that it will bring a transparency, it will bring the accountability, and that is where the problem is. We were thinking that our political class is ready to get transparent. Our political class is ready to get accountable, and actually that's why they are not ready, really don't want to share their political powers. Why? So there is because nobody want to share the powers, but still it is if we are creating another layer of the institution at the decentralized level, the kind of weightage people are giving to the MLAs will not be given. And then they say that then people will not know us, they will not come to us. Then how we will establish there that they are the representatives of the people.
Um,
So yeah.
Peter, just sorry, we're almost towards the end of our time. So if you can conclude, and if we've been given 5 minutes extra. So if anyone has, maybe one or two questions and that can be clubbed or something, just some reflections would be good. So if you can conclude, Sridhar.
Okay, so I have 2 minutes.
Yeah, you have a minute.
A minute.
And if there are questions, then we can go a little over. Otherwise, we'll conclude the session because we are over with that.
Right. So yeah, so my concluding remarks will be like there is a need of understanding the politics of our country in urban areas, and there is a need of creating more spaces or creating more representation spaces, because in a rural part there is a gram panchayat and that kind of a structure, but urban part there was not. Even the area sabha kind of model what we were trying to experiment, and these models are not really happening because they are not the constitutional yet, they are not legalized yet. Even the the, that whatever form they are there, they are not implemented by the governments. And I think that civil society need to work collectively to build this kind of understanding among the people who are the decision makers, that this decentralization of power through the through the concepts like area sabha, concepts like area sabha representatives need to be introduced, need to be debated, need to be need to be communicated to the policymakers, and we need to build pressure to them to make it happen. And I think that will make the resilient communities for the future.
Thank you so much. I mean, that's actually an extremely important note to end on. I really want to thank all our speakers and the audience for the questions in the Q&A box. I see that a lot of the questions are answered. Unfortunately, we are way over time, actually 2 minutes over time, and I don't see any open questions. So I think we'll close this session and move to the next session on affordable housing. Thank you again, everyone, for your participation, and look forward to many more conversations.
Thank you. Thank you, Lubaina, for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. We're excited for you to join the next session, which is improving affordable urban housing community needs and safe response. I just wanted to reiterate, if you have questions to ask, please do ask them in the Q&A section. We're really excited to hear from you. Just a note also about the plenary, which is at 2 o'clock, and you can see it on the app. There's a plenary by Professor Mohammed Yunus, followed by a plenary by Ruba Khulda from Media Network India. Additionally, this track on the urban informal economy is brought to you by Media Network India and World Resources Institute India. Thank you, everyone. And on to you, Bharat. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Rashi. Pleasure to have everybody here with us. We have another wonderful panel. It's great to follow the previous panel that talked about many of the community-related issues. I think some of which we'll be touching upon today in this panel as well. My name is Bharat. As I said, I'm a director at Omidyar Network India. I'll just make very brief introductions to the other panelists that we have here. It's, as I said, a really eminent group of panelists. I'll just introduce all of them really briefly. I know you can read all of the detailed bios online and so on. So I won't try to go into the full list of accomplishments and so on with such an esteemed panel. I think that'll end up taking a long time. So I'll just call them out in the order in which they'll be speaking. We'll first hear from Rajit Matthews, who's Head of Urban Development at WRI India. Then we'll go to Mr. Jagjeevan Neelkanda Pillai. He is the former Program Officer of Kudumbashree and consultant for the LSGD Government of Kerala. Then we'll hear from Professor Amita Bhide. She is a professor at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, TISS, and where she's also the Dean of the School of Habitat Studies. And then finally, we'll hear from Shubhagato Dasgupta, who is a Senior Fellow at the Center for Policy Research. So again, as I said, a great panel. I think a lot of really interesting issues for us to get into when it comes to housing for informal workers in urban areas. Questions about sort of economics, questions about governance, the role of communities, and so on. So I know there'll be a lot of rich insights in here. I'll first call upon Rejit to talk about some of her findings from her work at WRI. So Rejit, over to you.
Thank you, Bharat. I will just start sharing my screen. So do let me know if you can see it.
Yes, it's on.
It's on? All right. Thank you very much, Bharat, and a very good morning to my fellow speakers and to the audience as well. Since it's a general audience, it would be good to do a few introductory numbers to understand sort of the shape and nature of India's housing issues. I'll just put this on full screen as well. Yeah. All right. So this is really in many ways the size of the problem. This has been put together by the technical committee that was looking at urban housing shortage in 2012. This is known as the Kundu Committee report. But for a broad sort of understanding of what is the deficit, it was about 18.78 million housing units for India in the assessment year 2012. What they found, interestingly, which is really the next column, is the housing condition was really the problem. It was not that it's homelessness as the big problem. It was the fact that these houses were inhabitable in many ways, uninhabitable. So really the sort of structural quality, dilapidation, age, and very importantly, and you can see the bulk of 80% is really congestion. Congestion is the issue we have in slums today. For example, small houses of about 300 square feet, having a large number of people living in, maybe 5-10 people at a time. So this really bringing in what the nature of the housing problem is. And again, another very important finding that came out is the income group that requires this housing. It was not really, sort of the middle income groups or the higher income groups, really about just a 4% lack in that area. But 96% of the gap is really in the lower income groups and the economically weaker sections. Now, this would beg the question that if this is where 96% of the gap is here, is this segment of society really involved in, sort of decentralized policy making? Are they empowered to take decisions and decentralized implementation as well? But on the ground, we don't see that picture very clearly in most cities and states. I'll just zoom into what this kind of condition looks like on the ground. So what is the ground situation here? This is a lower income settlement in Rajokri area in Delhi. As you can see clearly, a lack of basic services, water supply, sanitation, open spaces. Pretty much the people have to come onto the streets because there's not enough space inside. And this also raises questions today in sort of the COVID situation. We're telling people to stay indoors, but really that may not be the best situation for them. So how do we manage these situations? Further, where are they located? Often, as we know, in the case of slums, vulnerable areas, this one, another village that we did detailed surveys and workshops in is in Goga in Delhi, next to a garbage dump, pretty much where some of these settlements are able to then grow. What we did in many ways is to do some workshops to understand, what are the community needs. And in many ways in this session, we're looking at community needs and the state response. This is to understand what do they need, what are their priorities versus what the state provides. So if I refer to schemes like, say, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, they offer you, a pakka house. If you're an eligible beneficiary, of course, you can opt for a pakka house at a different location. You can take a credit link subsidy, or you can take some money to sort of improve or increase your house size. But the question is that really what the people are asking for? And some consultations we had with sort of the slum settlements in both of these village areas. Very often you see slums basically coming up next to urban villages because of common lands being available, etc. They proliferate near villages. Villages themselves tend to decline over time because of lack of services into slums. So these, all areas of high vulnerability and informality, of course. So they were very clear that, we can talk about all of this later, but we are happy where we are. We just need tenure security and land rights, some sort of, if not ownership, at least give us rights to use. And then we are happy to invest in our own houses if we have that security. After which, then
I think Rajiv possibly just froze. We'll give her a minute. Otherwise, maybe we can move on to the next speaker and come back. Yeah, perhaps we can go on, Bharat, and I'll fix this with Rajiv.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Rashi. Let's do that. So, Mr. Jagjeevan, if I could invite you in next. You have, of course, been running helping run the Kudumbashree program. You've been part of that for a number of years. And you're also now consulting with many other states that are looking to emulate a similar model. So if you could tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that government is facing. I think Rajit was going to set this up with her next slide, which is essentially going to talk about some of the lack of capacity that governments face.
Bharat?
Yeah, hi Rajit, are you back?
Hi, I'm back through my mobile device. So I suppose if I could just verbally complete the last bit.
Yeah, please go ahead and complete. That's great.
If that would be all right. Yeah.
That's
so just sort of looking at the occupation profile of many of these slum dwellers and migrants. Actually, the situation we're looking at is in Bangalore. Unfortunately, the slides are not moving, but to look at the occupation profile, we looked at a peripheral village and slum area in Bangalore. Clearly, about 68% were migrants, many basically taking up daily wage jobs, are coolies, are sort of petty shop working and doing multiple jobs for their. This is very sort of, as we know, informal sector jobs with low social security. Now, this village is getting in Bangalore is getting the designation of a slum to go for redevelopment, under the guise of being informal and hence illegal. But at the same time, an informal and illegal settlement right next to it, but of course, an upscale suburban development is getting regularized very fast. So, there's clearly this disjunct between, really we have to understand who individually or collectively has action and agency over time across multiple scales and stages. And that's sort of leading to my last two slides. WRI, other than working sort of with communities and doing workshops to understand needs, is also a national training entity with the government of the Housing and Urban Affairs Ministry. So we do training and capacity building under Amrut. We were also doing some housing related training capacity building. So hence we did a survey across about 7-8 housing like boards and development authorities. And what we found is that their issues, we asked them about what is preventing them from reaching sort of the housing for all mission in many ways. So clear issues of policy disjunct. They're saying centrally there's an intent, but the ground reality is quite different. Capacity and capability constraints. In many ways, when capacity building exercises are done, they just tick mark and, we just have to give our attendance. Social audits. Now, this was introduced more recently for central government schemes to get feedback from the people on how the scheme is going, whether it's, how it's performing, etc. And this is getting very difficult to manage locally because these housing boards face a lot of pressures, including political, and these kind of feedbacks are difficult to source in their true form. And of course, the siloed approach to housing delivery, really missing out on interlinkages. These are officers telling us this, that we're only looking at numbers, we're delivering certain numbers and getting our tick marks, but all of the other linkages, like we would like to discuss in the session between shelter, livelihoods, informal economy, and sort of down top approaches being missed out. And so that, again, my concluding slide was talking about 7 lakh crores is the estimated investment on housing up to 2022 from the central government. So, sort of how and where is this investment going? Is it reflecting on the needs of the people? And is the state able to respond to the same? But I would end there just as sort of an introduction. Over to you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rajit. That was really informative. Mr. Jagjeevan, if I could turn to you next, and essentially request you to reflect on the Kudumbashree and the Kerala experience from 2 points of views. I think one is, we heard a little bit from Rajit about the importance of bringing the community into the planning process. They have needs that might be completely different from what somebody at a central level might assume that they are. So tell us a little bit about, as you're talking about the Kudumbashree story, in particular with the focus on how you brought the community into the process. And I know that there are several nuances to the story, but if you could stick to the housing part of it, that would be really helpful. And if you can take about 5-6 minutes over it, that should leave us enough time to get to some of the audience questions as well. So over to you, Mr. Jagjeevan.
Okay, thank you for inviting me to the seminar. First, I need to make this correction. And now I am as a consultant of Haritha Kerala Mission, and also supporting some other state for Panchayat institutions and the program. I am not going to any other points or to discussion. Only I'm focusing on what the points you placed for the comments. The first things is that the role of community network and local government in urban housing program. You see, in Kerala, actually, our urban housing program, you just see, you see 99% of the household, urban household, have their own toilet. Means it is a toilet linked with the houses. Our the latest figure, you see, only 1% of the population have no good housing facility in our slum and or the poor families. This is only 1%. We have a special program to address this houseless poor people. That is, now we have the you see the life mission, a special life mission program for housing, and also the central schemes. What is the role of the CBO in housing is that, you see, the first thing is the identification of the correct right holder, that is, or the beneficiary. We are saying not the beneficiary, the right holder, the first things. The correct identification we can do through the community institutions, we say collectives. That's the first thing. The second is the approval of the design. You see, generally what happened in the housing program of the state or central, they will give a type design that may not be accepted by the right holder or the poor people. So here we are following to taking their opinion and their suggestion for the finalization of the design, the second thing. The third thing is the implementation role. Means we are providing the proper space in the implementation process, the construction process. And fourth thing is that we already created women construction groups from the community. They are also getting opportunity for the construction of the housing program. And the fifth thing is that, you see, the community network have opportunity to monitor the construction of the programs, the quality and the timing and the financial components will monitoring by the community. And also we have no simple housing program. All our housing program is linked with the their livelihood also. That is the major component. At the same time, you already placed the other question, what are the challenges? The major challenges is that, you see, our LSC in Kerala, you see, one municipality have minimum 15 to 20 crore rupees their annual plan. Urban municipal corporation, it will come to 30 to 40 crores. More than that, if you include the central and state department scheme assistance, it will come near to 100 crore or something. But you see, you look at the other states, the financial position of the local body is very big, the first things. And also their power in the urban slum development and housing program is very less. And it is now under the state department or state urban development department. No role in the the planning or construction or implementation of urban housing, the local body and the community sector have no role. That's the second challenge. And third one is that no direct participation of rights holders in the design or the planning or the implementation or any components of the implementation aspect. No, the community or the right holder have no role in the construction. And also, generally what happened, the urban housing program is they will relocate the slum to some other places. They will not consider their livelihoods. Generally, the slum people have their livelihood maybe depends upon near to their slum. So wherever I visited the places, the urban cities, they never consider the urban poor. Their housing program is not linked with their livelihoods. These are the key challenges facing. Means first of all, we need to empower the panchayat and municipality. First, give more power, more resources, more human resources and technical support. The first things. The second thing is to create is not to depend only for the local government, but need to ensure the collective of the community. That is very important. Otherwise, this power will up to the local elected representative or mayor or municipal chairman or some other officer. That will not permit. So the community network is very important in the from the planning process to the implementation level. The full cycle we need to ensure the right holders participation. That is the second thing. And also to ensure to create community network of here how we are implementing the Kudumbashree network, the key nodal agency for urban housing program. The Kudumbashree mission, the government of India and the state government will channelize the money to the Kudumbashree mission, and Kudumbashree mission is taking the lead for the implementation of the housing. How to implement? Implementation through the community network and local body. And the another one point we need to take to your attention is that we are promoting the alternate technology for in the construction. Means two key elements we are promoting. The first thing is that the participation of the community network and the construction group formed from the community, women construction group. And second, alternative building technology. Means the urban housing program itself a livelihood program for the urban poor. That is very interesting thing. You see, here we have a program in the Trivandrum Corporation, Karimadan Colony. The project implementation, from the planning and the implementation and the final bill payment is implemented through the leadership of the community network. That is the way. So my request is that, or my suggestion is that, first of all, we need to, especially the situation of the COVID control. What are the key learnings from the COVID means? The empowerment of local communities, the first things, and the strengthening of local livelihood is the second things, and also affordable habitation or shelter is the important factor for ensuring the physical distancing or the safety of the vulnerable or aged or morbidity persons. Then the proper or scientific housing is very important. This context, only the way to address this vulnerable situation to strengthen the local community through local government, parallelly to create community network to address this issue.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jagjeevan. Really a rich set of learnings there, especially reflections on sort of strengthening local government, empowering communities, the role of technology in construction and so on. Lots of really interesting lessons there. So thank you so much for that. Professor Bhide, if I could bring you in next. You have studied and researched a lot about the role that proactive development agencies can play in making sure that housing is actually built up as and when the demand comes up in cities like Aurangabad and many others. So if I could ask you to reflect on the role that development agencies of the state can actually play here, and also maybe draw the links between some of these smaller cities like Aurangabad and how that model can actually apply even to larger cities like, say, Delhi and Mumbai and so on. That would be great. So over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Bharat. So I'll first take off actually from the point that Jagjeevan made in terms of the link between livelihood and housing. I mean, it's a brief digression from what perhaps you've asked me to speak on, but just a very brief point there.
Please, sure.
And I actually think that the link between livelihood and housing is one of the most critical ones. And we see this link being made at two ends. One is the very, very poor end, where livelihood becomes the primary need and housing then is really offset. So people prefer to live in the riskiest of places, or where tenure is very, very highly insecure, or the housing quality is very bad, but livelihood becomes the primacy. This is at the lower end of the income spectrum. And at the higher end of the income spectrum, actually where people have a choice uh, to work from home. And I think today the COVID epidemic actually illustrates us that integrated housing or integrated workplace home is something which is possible for the highest income group, whereas actually it is the most imperative need for the lowest income groups. And I think restoring that balance today in our thinking and in our policy has become extremely critical. So having said that, our design of cities does not necessarily allude to this kind of integration at all, because our plans do not talk about workplaces and residential places really as separated. And that's the way in which our cities have grown, whether it is small cities, whether it is large cities. Having said that, coming to this issue of development agencies, okay, I do not quite agree with Mr. Jagjeevan saying that it is always local government which has to play a role. In fact, if you look at states like Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu or Andhra Pradesh, it is the development agencies like the housing boards which have played and which have a strong legacy, experience, and the architecture to also work on local housing issues, but they need to have the space where local solutions can be developed. Now, the instance of Aurangabad that you talked about, Aurangabad is a very interesting city, and where today you will see that more than 70% of the people stay in various kinds of informal settlements. These range from a very, very highly congested inner town, uh, uh, old Aurangabad city, very old, uh, to a orange ribbon, which is called a ribbon-like development, which is outside Aurangabad city, and slums as well. But there was a period of roughly 15 years when CIDCO was set up, brought to Aurangabad. So CIDCO is a state agency. Okay? It was brought in to plan in a new industrial unit and industrial area for Aurangabad. But industry and housing went hand in hand together. This is an agency which was also equipped and had the resources to implement. Okay? So this is what created the local space. This space of 15 years, there were hardly any developments and increase in the amount of slum population in Aurangabad. Now, this tells us also something, that development agencies also need to have a local space to develop locally sensitive solutions. Okay? On the other hand, a model like Kerala's today can be exported to the entire country, and you will say, no, this is how it has to be done, this is how poverty means, and then it can be a complete imposition on other cities all over the country. So one needs to understand that local space means diversity. I'll come to a final point that I want to make. And I think this is actually coming not just from smaller cities, but also what I see in Mumbai, where I'm located. And that is the point that basically housing and affordable housing is extremely time, space sensitive. So there are particular conjunctures at which you need to act. And if you don't act at those conjunctures, every housing problem can actually be vitiated. It becomes a wicked problem then. And then solving that problem does not, I mean, it's not easy. It does not lend to easy solutions. To just give one small example here, Mumbai has had slums since 1940s, roughly. So today we are talking of third or fourth generation slum dwellers. On the other hand, recognition of that slum dwellers need some kind of a housing solution as well has come in the 1980s, by which time the reality of slums itself had changed. So you cannot have the same solutions to a first generation slum, which you can have to a second generation or a third generation slum. So aspirations would have changed here. The dynamics of what is a slum would have changed here. And the space for policy would have that much become more lesser and very difficult then to traverse.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you so much, Professor Bide. Lots of really interesting points. Time being of the essence. Your point about industry and housing really also underscores your earlier point about the importance of livelihoods, which Mr. Jagjeevan also made. That's great. Thank you so much for that. Shubhagota, if I could bring you into the conversation at this point, and have you reflect a little bit about the fact again that I think it builds on the same point that I was just mentioning. The fact is that we often think about housing as a standalone service. But often you really need to think about it in conjunction with other services, whether it's infrastructure or the point about livelihoods that we've been talking about thus far. So if you could build on that and talk about your experience in that space, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Bharat. Delighted to be here. Thanks for reaching out. It's rarely that I find something that I don't agree with Amita ji. So I'm excited about this conversation. It means as COVID-19 and of course this lockdown has exposed these vulnerabilities which have been long-standing demands of researchers and scholars working in the field. I think it gives us a great opportunity to look at the state-society compact afresh. In that, in the way I'm looking at it, if you just look at how government in its multi-tier dimension has been working in this period of lockdown. While the national government and state governments were doing stay-at-home policies, they were working from home. 80% of municipal staff were emergency frontline workers. Yeah. To reimagine the space of what national policies should be aiming to do, I think this is it's a big spotlight into the roles and responsibilities that we have given to our local governments, but don't really support them in delivering that. So I'll look through the government, the national policies by looking at housing policies itself, then housing, livelihood and planning, and then housing, land and infrastructure. There's 3 buckets. And just make a few quick points. So in housing itself, the challenge over this period has been, it's not the first housing program that the government of India has been running, but it has led to a very, it's only a set of products in the housing market for the urban poor. There is a great need to diversify these products. And then in the PMAY and AMRUT together, these schemes have to make that a goal for themselves and not only come up with new models as they see it from the center. Of course, means that we are speaking today, we have this, we are super excited that rental housing has come back into the mix. That's a very big gain from yesterday. But there too, the government restricts it to institutional rental housing and to these larger facilities, ignoring the fact that as of today, most of the urban poor live in informal settlements, in rents, who are invisible or without contracts. So transitioning to a full institutional model, it can be done, and in Singapore there are various examples of this route, but will require a more nuanced step-by-step approach, which many state governments have pursued. 2 examples means in this context, just the example of Tamil Nadu, where there are rental housing programs for particular sets developed in particular time periods due to Government of India push. But these are from 5 to 20 years. But it's not transparent because the full land transfer or the unit transfer does not happen, though they're called rent-to-ownership programs. And there is, again, means each time the push from the government has been to go back and re-densify these existing units built in the 70s and 80s. In Orissa, or more generally, the what's it called, BLC, the program part of PMAY, which is a self-help kind of housing program, has seen the biggest uptake. 65 to 70% of the units under PMAY have been individuals directly accessing housing subsidies. However, these have their limitations because there is a significant individual contribution to it, and the institutional linkages on the finance side, for example, need to be strengthened and should be made part of the program. There are a whole set of recommendations, some that Mr. Jeevan referred to, that will make uptake of these kinds of programs easier and more beneficial, and will reach the communities faster. In housing, livelihood, and planning, I think, it means in the context of keeping housing in the center of it, means housing in the city. In one of our studies in Chennai, we are seeing that there's been a lot of peripheralization of slums. And this is happening by government policy. We're driven by the housing policies. But what the community's response has been is that they are coming back to the center and going back on rent in the center. And that's evident even in our 5-year, 7-year cycle of the two national sample surveys on housing that have happened recently. And rental housing has become, what was 30% earlier this decade is now 40% in the Chennai metropolitan area. In terms of, so connecting housing to livelihoods, of course, is central. And as mentioned by Amitaji, means the stark difference of how we are treating low-income housing is very evident by keeping them further away from their workplaces. Interestingly, Orissa has come up with a very nice, interesting, immediate and medium-term relief exercise under something called the Urban Wage Employment Scheme, which is going to allow local communities to get involved in municipal services. And the municipal services is also a big employer for wage earners. So the more if those are liquid and if we can pass money down through them, there's a huge scope of improving municipal services as an outcome of local area development exercises like the Urban Wage Employment Scheme. I believe this is going to be scaled up in its across the country too. And then finally, on the point of land, housing, and infrastructure, I mean, the way in the recent past we've been running our programs from the national level, and this has its own historic context that while urban development is very much a local subject and has been for a while, I mean, they have not really invested in urban policy making as much, the state governments. Of course, except for a few cases where they have. And these being driven from the center through very strict rules of programs don't allow for infrastructure, housing, and land to get interlinked. Jaga Mission, again, Orissa is a state we work very closely with, is reinventing this exercise by using the opportunity of housing to give out land rights and connect the poor in informal settlements to the subsidy program. So a big benefit there, because not only does it link the immediate housing program, but for future builds a lot of strength in the social structure of the city. So, at the structural level, land planning, housing infrastructure, and livelihoods in urban areas, which is very much the advisory responsibility of this one ministry, should be seen in a continuum. And that can happen, in my opinion, with by decentralization and rethinking whether these programs are improving the city community social compact. Those need to be built where I agree with Amitaji at the city level. But however, the flexibility, ingenuity that you have to give down with these schemes will determine whether the scheme is good or not. And building human and social capital, both at the community level and at the city level, with the housing agency being, in one sense, an arm of the local body, which is an elected and mandated governance tier, to oversee that will allow for these spaces to be more vibrant on a wider scale as we scale up. Thanks so much.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Subhagato. I know a few questions have come in. I'll probably end up sort of going over the time that we had set for this session by about 10 minutes or thereabouts, just to allow for at least one question per panelist. I don't think we'll be able to, unfortunately, do full justice to all of the questions that have come in. But maybe if I could start with you, Mr. Jagjeevan. One of the questions that's come in for you is, just of an estimate of the amount of housing subsidies given to houses which are not actually inhabited by the beneficiary or by the rights holder, as you put it, in the case of Kerala. And the questioner is saying it seems that the uniqueness of Kerala in connecting housing with livelihood could be the reason that this doesn't happen very often, that you actually have empty houses where people are seeking subsidies to sort of improve the condition of the house. Is that indeed the case? We'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Mr. Jagjeevan, can you hear me? You're on mute in case you're speaking.
Okay. So three more questions I have to answer, I think. The one question is for the how to link with the livelihood and housing program. And second is that the subsidy from the state government. Is it correct?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, if you could just address the subsidy one, Mr. Jagjeevan, I'm not sure we'll have time to address all the questions. So if you could talk about this the subsidy piece in particular, that would be helpful, and then we can address some of the other questions.
Okay. You see here, in urban area, we have three key housing programs. The first category is the Government of India program, PMAY, and there the state share is coming from the state and local body, their plan grant. This both of integrated with the urban housing program. That is the first thing. And second program is that now the government of Kerala initiated one urban housing program, that is Life Mission. Life Mission is a state mission. It is for the people who are left out from the central housing program, and that we address through the state Life Mission program. It will come under the almost 90% of the subsidy for their housing program, where 10% is the beneficiary share. That the beneficiary share also they will get from the community loan, especially from the Kudumbashree SHG network. They will provide the loan. The third one is the urban local body have their own housing program, but this time we integrated the urban local bodies housing program with the Life Mission program. The state housing program and the local body housing program is merged this time. So the local body cannot first of all they just list out all the actual beneficiaries from the urban area, a single list named. Based on the single list, almost I think this year to cover all the houseless people through this Life Mission program. The next phase is the landless people. Landless is the 1 or 2 cents. For the urban area, the local body will help to purchase the land. That's the local body contribution. Then now the Life Mission also identified the land from the urban area for construction for the flat approach. Wherever the land is not available, there the government is taking the approach for the flat. So and here the problem is that the housing construction cost is little bit higher in other states. because our money is or our market is fully led by the immigrant people's money. That is as you see, the Gulf money is influencing our market. So the construction cost is little bit higher than, especially the labor cost also. You see, the daily wage persons will get minimum 850 rupees per day for a support labor. A skilled labor mason is at 1,250 rupees, and the supporter is near to 900 rupees. This is the wage component also, and the material cost is also very high. So that is why we need to increase the subsidy component. And the other state is not this much problem. That is the major things. Basically, this convergence happened at the local body level. That is why we can overcome the duplication of the funding pattern. Means here the state will give the fund support through the life mission, and the local body, okay, the Toronto Corporation need to construct 2,000 houses, then they can earmark a little bit money from their plan grant, and the remaining part will support from the life mission. This is approach our state government is looking forward. Get the next question opportunity?
No, I think let's try to get each of the panelists in, Mr. Jagjeevan, and then if we have a couple of minutes left, maybe we'll take one other question. So, Professor Bhide, if I could bring you back in to maybe elaborate on the ways to link livelihood and housing, and also maybe reflect on the question about just the cost of housing itself. I mean, which is obviously often just prohibitively expensive. I know you engaged on a question that had come in on that. So if you could reflect on both of those things, just are there ways structurally of driving the cost of housing down, which is obviously one of the biggest constraints, and anything structurally also about linking livelihoods and housing, similar to the industrial housing example that you just that you mentioned with Sitco. Sorry, you're on mute, Professor. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, can I go on?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'll first talk about the links between and how can one deliberately create links between livelihood and housing. Okay, and I'm just offering like a range of suggestions. Okay, first is thinking about the planning level. Okay? How we think and create separations between what are the conditions for residential housing and keeping it separate. But I think it is necessary perhaps to Indian cities need to have like a residential plus perhaps part commercial part, so one will need to look at combinations of those and not have even perhaps a little bit of industrial, which is also or mixed use, which is acceptable within this, because unless we do that, we will make everything not acceptable. Even in rehabilitation buildings, for example, some of the earlier industries like recycling, etc., become non-acceptable. The second is a way in which employers themselves create housing on a rental basis for employees. And I think Kerala has given us a good model for that. Tamil Nadu has shown worker housing again in the garment industry. There are a few examples. And I think this is something which has been there with us historically. We seem to have forgotten that. But I think there is a definite need to do this and perhaps also insist. And how do we, so the third and the most challenging issue is as industry and particularly small and micro industry has shifted and become more informal, the link between livelihood and housing and who carries the burden of housing has become more difficult. So we need to think of this question also in a much more fundamental manner. What constitutes our minimum wage? Is there any housing consideration within that? Okay. When we fix up any wages for even auto rickshaw drivers or people who are domestic workers, in all of those considerations, is there a housing cost component even added? Partly. Because otherwise you will only have public sector employees and people who come from a fairly large income contingent only they get HRAs, only they get housing loans, and all the rest of this, the LIG and the very poor or the EWS, as was stated by Rajit, are going to be left out of the market. I'll very briefly talk about how can we think about bringing the cost component down. And so one mode of playing with supply is really thinking about a larger development strategy where economic opportunities are more distributed. That is one. And the second, perhaps, way in which one can think about supply is how to increase the overall level of consumption and loan and housing finance preparedness amongst the various income groups that we have. Not just offering them credit, but first of all, making them credit worthy. Okay, and that's necessary. On the supply side, there is a lot to be done. So number one, how do we look at issues of vacant housing? How do we look at today the entire fact that the excess of speculation that one is causing, and how does one reorient the overall supply side to more local markets and demands? In every scale you will see. So there are second homes which are being created, there are holiday homes which are being created, and as a result, none of the markets today, unless one is talking of very, very remote areas, have remained local anymore. And as a result of this, this drives up housing prices. So one way in which perhaps one can look at cost is how to make markets more local, and what are the systems of both incentives as well as perhaps punishments in order to control that.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Professor Bide. Yeah, definitely a phenomenon of sort of a large number of houses remaining empty while costs continue to remain unaffordable is an important one to address. Very useful. Rajit, if I could turn to you next and ask you about just the phenomenon of social rental housing and why that segment has not taken off well, including PPPs. Any thoughts or reflections on that?
Sure. In fact, we've been asked by both state and central agencies to assist on PPP structuring. And when we went out and spoke to some of the actual real estate developers and then I see that as a question, why is the real estate market not coming into this segment? One of the developers put it this way in terms of the PPP policy. He said, the government is saying that you bring the land, you invest in it, you construct the buildings, but when you sell it, I will decide the cost and who gets that house. So he says this is a very unequal partnership. PPP has to be a partnership, not dictating terms in that sense. So definitely the way the policies are structured, there is very little experience also of PPP, and that's the other thing we got from surveys across states. I'm sure Mumbai is one case where maybe the SRA, the Slum Redevelopment Authority models are a version of PPP. They definitely have their drawbacks also. I'm sure Amita ma'am will have a lot to say about that, but most states have just not taken off on PPP. There is no experience. Guidelines are scanty or quite unreasonable, because clearly there's not much of a profit segment or a margin that's available in PPP houses. So that being one issue, there's no experience and there's low incentive to take it up. Similarly in social rental housing as well. I also saw a question that says, can you take up existing housing and make that social rental? Well, yes, why not? Definitely the states are pursuing these kind of options. We're working with the Delhi government to see if that's possible. Often what we see is that the stock that has not been taken up, whether central schemes and sometimes state schemes, is because they are very distant from where people would actually, they're not desirable homes. They might be structurally stable, but they're too distant. Often infrastructure has not yet reached that spot, and there's no transport, like there's no bus stop or some way to get back to the jobs that these people, informal sector has. So social rental housing, again, not an experienced model in the city. MMRD again in Maharashtra had tried social rental housing. Eventually they had to sell it out, and that's sort of what, sell it out to people who are willing to buy it, who are living there. Chandigarh is following a similar model in social rental housing. They are giving the option to buy back after you've lived there for about 20 years, but at the cost of that year when you're going to buy it back in the 20th year. So there's not much experience in both. So definitely a need for models, a need for experimentation to be able to achieve, better success. We are only good at PPP in roads and airports as of now. So thank you.
Got it. Thanks, Reggie. And Shubhagata, if I could ask you to reflect, you mentioned the fact that rental was at least given an announcement, given a mention in some of the announcements in the last day or so. But just what else would you have liked to see there? How else do you think that to your point about more diversity of options in the housing market, what more needed to be done there? What would you have liked to see? Shubhagata, sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, yeah. So picking up from Rajit's point and to this question, means I guess by clubbing lowest income housing, which is essentially rental housing for the poor, it's for the lowest bracket of our urban residents, and to develop a model which is leveraged through private capital is kind of getting means it's not very smart because the kind of costs you're getting into your capital and the kind of returns you're going to get from letting it out are very far apart. Rental housing in general, rents in India in general for the higher income categories too, is a fraction of the asset cost. So rental reform needs a whole set of instruments. We are coming from a tradition where renting was seen as a bad thing. So rent control was what was the flavor of the day for till the early 90s. And what if you look at social rental housing itself, it's an idea that came out of Northern Europe in the early 20th century, where the public sector used that as a big slum upgrading program and build a lot of capital for itself. So the cities and the housing agencies hold a whole set of assets which are very valuable as part of the city and the country's economy too. It is now in the last 20 years that there are new ways of bringing in, selling that out after a generation has reaped the benefits and the economy has caught up and people aren't so poor anymore that they're transferring some of these assets to individuals and to firms, where some rental housing through vouchers is still supported by the state. So looking at rental housing, the experiments that are happening and the past that we have done has been a very, what do I say? It's not thought through. Its whole potential is not understood. As jobs change and mobility increases, hopefully when we are recovering. I mean, rental housing is a big area that needs multiple layers of intervention. It can't be solved at the project level itself.
Got it. Wonderful. No, thank you so much for that. I know we are a few minutes past time already. There's still, as I suspected, a lot of unanswered questions out there. But hopefully, at least across these comments, you've been able to address many of the questions. I know it was quite a fascinating conversation with a number of really good insights from across several different programs that have been tried across the country, and a lot of sort of options for what can be done. Mr. Jagjeevan, sure, I'll turn it over to you for maybe one final word in a minute, and then we'll have to close.
Only I need to say, if you share the questions, we can answer to the question to people.
Sure, that'd be great. Yeah.
Then there's some. I just went through the questions. The people are raising some key questions to know more about that. You see, interesting thing is one person is raising of the how to link with the livelihood, and I am very much interested in that. I am free to share my thoughts and ideas to them. So you please send the question to us. I will send the question to your institution. You can share the people who want to. That sounds wonderful. Then we can share that.
We'll definitely do that and maybe use the website and sort of the ongoing conversation to get some of those questions answered as well. But with that, I do need to bring this to a close. So thank you so much to all of the panelists. You've all been wonderful, and it's been great of you to share your time and share your insights here. So thank you for doing that on behalf of both Omidyar Network India and WRI. And with that, I'll turn it back to Rashi.
Thank you, everyone, for the rich discussion. Thank you, audience, for the questions, and thank you for moderating, Bharat. So our next session actually starts at 12:45. So we're going to idle for 15 minutes. All the audience, please stay on. That's a really interesting session. It's on identity being a key enabler for service delivery. So hope to see you here back in 15 minutes. Again, if you're watching this on a live streaming service, please do get on the app so that you can actually interact with the speakers and get your questions answered. We'd love to hear from you. Great. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Additionally, I think that the attendees can only see the questions that have been answered currently. I'm just changing the question and answer settings so that everyone can see all the questions, just so that you can learn from the questions too. So I'm going to keep that setting on for a few minutes before I disable that again. Thanks. And I guess the last note, if the panelists want to stay on for the next session, you're totally welcome to stay on as panelists as long as your video is off and your mic is on mute, so that we don't interrupt the next session. But I do understand that it's hard to switch to an attendee, so do stay on as a panelist if you wish to see the next session. Thank you. Hi everyone. So our next session starts at 12:45. We're going to idle for a few minutes until then. So I see that a few panelists are joining. Welcome. We'll start really soon. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, welcome to the panel. We're just idling for 10 minutes until the session starts at 12:45. So do stick on. We see your video. We see your video. Mr. Khandelwal, we're idling for 10 minutes. So I can see your video. So your video test is good. Perhaps it would be better to switch it off until we officially start.
Rashi, hi, can you see me? This is Sandeep here.
Yes, Sandeep, I can see you too. Oh, great.
All right.
Yeah,
Cheers. See you later.
See you in a bit. Yeah.
This is Rajiv. Rashi, are you able to hear me and see me?
Yes, I can hear you and see you.
Okay,
So
great.
that's a good test then. Yeah. See you in a few. Hi, I see that there are still some attendees on the call. We're so glad to have you. We'll start at 12:45, so do stay on and join us for the next discussion. Hi, everyone. This is Rashi from the Nudge Foundation. We'll be starting in just 3 minutes. So do stay on this Zoom call. We'll get started really soon. Thank you.
Can you hear me, Rashi?
Yes, yes, we can hear you now, Shilpa.
Should we just do is this open to participants, or can we just do a voice and a camera check with everyone?
This is actually broadcasting right now, but we can see you and we can hear you, and everyone else is also, we briefly checked with everyone else also.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm just going to quickly introduce Charcha 2020 to the audience that has joined us, and then I'll hand it over to you, Shilpa.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, hi everyone. Again, you've been hearing my disembodied voice. We're really, really glad to have you join us for Charcha 2020. Today's session is 45 minutes, but depending on the questions we get, we may extend it. That seems to be a trend. We've just been getting such excellent questions. The audience, you are only in listen mode, so that means you can't say anything or turn on your video currently. However, you can put your questions in the Q&A box that you should see towards the bottom of your screen. If you are not on Zoom right now and you're watching this on live video, either on YouTube or Book My Show or the Quint or any other streaming service, you will not be able to ask questions from the panelists, unfortunately. We would love for you to join us on the actual platform on Zoom. So do check out our website and also the app. So with that, I'm just going to hand it to Shilpa. We're really glad to have you here, Shilpa.
Yeah, thank you, Rashi. It's my pleasure to be here on Charcha 2020. And I think talking about something which is a really pertinent topic in today's times, which is identity in the urban informal economy. I think the last few months have highlighted and brought into sharp focus a few things. One, our cities have a significant contribution from people who are not domiciled, formal employment contracts. Second is that 1 out of almost every 2 people who stay in the city, or at best, maybe 1 out of every 3 people are people who are staying in slums. A third is that most such slums are not notified and lack basic services of water supply, sanitation, health, education. I think there are 2 large implications of these 3 facts in the post-COVID world. First, the health of the city as a whole. We've seen reports that, are mapping significant COVID outbreaks in areas with such slums. Second, and most important, is the fact that for this demographic, the informal economy, migrant workers staying in a city slum, there is significant health and income vulnerability, and equally significantly, a lack of access to welfare benefits. Today, 30% of country's population lives in urban India, and if approximately 40% of them belong to this demographic, it's imperative that in a post-COVID world, we focus on the individual and her engagement with the city, engagement in terms of access to basic services, engagement in terms of access to welfare benefits, and engagement in terms of being an important part of the holistic city. Let me introduce the panel that we have. I think one that will bring very diverse and rich views to this discussion. And I'll kick off with Rajiv Khandelwal, who's joining us from Udaipur. Rajiv is co-founder and executive director of Ajivika Bureau. He has held leadership roles in several non-profit organizations in a 30-year career. He was an Ashoka Fellow in 2005, India Social Entrepreneur of the Year 2010, and Ajivika Bureau, established in 2005, actually focuses on the migrant and informal workers, including legal awareness and aid, healthcare, financial services, and skill training. Sandeep Sachdeva is joining us from London, co-founder and CEO of Safe in India, which he has set up to assist industrial workers who have lost hands or fingers in the auto sector supply chain in India. Currently repurposing the organization to assist migrant workers suffering from COVID-19 lockdowns. Saryu Natarajan joins us from Bangalore. Saryu is the founder of Apti Institute, which works to develop knowledge at the frontier of technology and society. She has a PhD from King's College London with a special interest on migration, housing, and urban electoral politics. Aniket Dugar joins us from Shimla. Aniket is the co-founder and CEO at Hak Darshak and has over 8 years of experience in the development sector. He's an Acumen India Fellow 2018. With that, let me kick it off and start with Rajiv. Rajiv, circular migrants are a crucial part of the city's fabric. Looking back, what are your observations about their ability to access basic services like sanitation, health, education? What do you think makes it so hard, and what do you think would enable it?
Okay. Thank you, Shilpa, for that very... am I audible? I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So thank you, Shilpa, and thank you, and great to meet everyone on this platform. Thank you for having me here. and the topic is very moved to what we do in future in our cities. And my basic proposition is that whatever we are seeing in the cities is not new. It is an amplification of what already existed. The wholesale kind of alienation of informal workers and migrant workers from cities, which has resulted in their exodus, is actually a sign of what the kind of distorted relationship that migrants and informal workers have with the city to begin with. The short answer to your question is that their ability to access basic services is actually very limited. It's very compromised. And it is that ability that we have to now empower, we have to change going forward. What makes it hard is that large numbers of our informal workers in urban areas are not staking permanent claims in the city. They are only seasonal people. They are people who have come to work, engage with the city in an economic sense. They're there to earn a wage, a living, and then take it back to their villages. And they intend to go back and resettle, back in the rural areas till such time their children have started to migrate and come back to cities. So it is lack of permanence that actually creates like a hindrance, which means that they are not part of the political fabric. They don't have voting rights. They are not a political constituency. They're ultimately a population that is there to earn and then go back. So they're in between people. The other big reason why urban services have remained distant from this group is the fact that all our services are pegged to domicile, to proof of domicile. It means that you will get your services if you can prove that you actually belong to the city. Now, that's a very major kind of flaw in the way our city, our urban services are designed. It means that people who may be living in the city for years and years and for better part of the year will actually not be able to access ration, will not be able to, get housing, sanitation, health care, education for their children, despite the fact that their contributions are so rich and so profound to the city's economic prosperity. But because of lack of domicile proof, they will not be able to access it. I think there is a certain there's not just a design flaw. There's also in the way our budget allocations, our financing has been structured. Our federal structure is being operated in a way that does not keep in mind that people are no longer sedentary. It's a highly mobile population. People will move. They will go from rural to urban areas, and they will take with them their disadvantages. They're poor and unconnected and alienated in rural areas, and they are going to reproduce those disadvantages in the cities. And I think it is really important that our design starts to think about urban planning and urban governance starts to think about that it is not dealing just with slum dwelling people. In many ways, I feel that slum dwelling people have actually found a foothold in the city. They will at least be given some services, some benefits, some essential kind of allocations will be made to them, but not the very bottom end of that demographic, which is actually the migrant worker. Now, my proposition is that we look at going forward these services, which are very much in the genre of roti kapda makan for informal workers and for migrant workers. We make sure that workers have food to eat. Let us remember that our workers, our informal workers, our migrant workers are amongst the lowest paid in the world. What they earn is not sufficient for them to eke out a dignified life in the city. So there has to be public provisioning and subsidy to helping them survive in city environments. So food, subsidized food is really essential, which means PDS. Decent housing, subsidized decent housing is very central. Let us remember that they are not people seeking permanent housing in the city. They are seeking part-time rental, temporary shelter. Let us ensure that that service is kind of up there. And finally, health and education becomes seamlessly accessible to them. And it is part of the social kind of offering, the part of the new social contract that the city makes with the migrant workers. And it is those services that need, I think, strengthening in urban areas. Currently, it is the breakdown of that contract, which in any way was very weak in the beginning, which is resulting in people desperately trying to get out of cities back to the villages, which at least offers them some dignity in their poverty. Right now, cities have kind of broken that contract with people.
Right. Rajiv, may I ask you a follow-up question? I know you said roti, kapra, or makan, but in relation to housing, what we've observed is even when a simple act of notifying a slum sometimes enables better access to services. So, what do you think about that? And in terms of a migrant population which is in the city, uh, how do you think the welfare connect can be strengthened? I know you did speak about it a bit, but would you like to talk a little bit more about it?
So, that's interesting. So, slums do get some access, and
We are losing you, Rajiv. Rajiv, we are losing you.
So, Shilpa, this is there he's back.
Under flyovers, and it is these settlements that I think need to be recognized as spaces that are contributing to the urban prosperity. So one of the first things is to do is to map, enumerate, and not criminalize them, not evict them, but understand that these are spaces that are existing. These are people who are not beggars or just destitutes. They're part of the city's working population. So I think to legitimize these settlements with a view to start providing at least transitory services till people have, till the cities have sorted out the.
Yeah.
Uncounted people. In Ahmedabad, where we work, for example, that data I shared with you earlier, 55 lakh people total population, 8 to 10 lakh people who are uncounted migrant workers in Ahmedabad. The city doesn't account for them. And it is for these people that services need to now kick in and be real. Resources do exist. They don't have to be part of the slum population to be served. These other settlements can be served as well. I think, it is really important to get to come to this political consensus around this, that these are people who are there, who need services, who cannot be, they can't just come and be wished away to become invisible after they've done their bit. I think urban governance and urban planning has a lot to do in this context, and it is not just a labor issue. I think it is a city development and planning issue that we are up against.
Sure. No, thank you for that, Rajiv. Sarju, maybe if I can move to you. You have, studied the role of technology and the role of political intermediaries between the state and the citizen and their role in providing services. So, what are your takeaways, in terms of how this ecosystem can work?
Sure. Thank you very much, Shilpa. It's very exciting to be here. I think before we start talking about what intermediaries can actually do, I think it's useful to also realize that there are multiple types of intermediaries. So political intermediaries can be seen as one end of the spectrum, but there are other kinds of intermediaries that work to serve citizens in connecting them to the state or in enabling migrants to see the state or enabling poor citizens to see the state. Some of these are NGOs or local community service organizations. They could also be just, in my fieldwork, people called leaders or local bigwigs who can play the role in helping people connect to the state. So to recognize that there's a range and there's sort of potentially a differentiation in the way they help with citizens, as well as help in intimidating the state is important right up front. Now, it's also important to realize, and again, this is something that's coming out from the work we are doing now in looking at urban service delivery and also my old work, is that the intermediation is not always at an individual level, but very often at a community level. And I think that's particular insight is very, very important in thinking about the role of technology, particularly because technology seems to see communities as atomized individuals, that each one of us has a relationship with the state, which is true, and nobody's denying that or taking that away. But there is very often the situation that communities engage with the state asking for something in their neighborhood. So it could be a road, it could be better street lighting. This is in the domain of service delivery. Even welfare, which is most often individualized, there is a community dimension to it, in that very often communities together have a common need for accessing certain types of welfare programs. So programs around housing, for example, which is usually like the JNNURM is done at a community level. So to take away the community dimension is something that can actually hinder individual and citizen access to the state. And so I guess the biggest takeaway here is for technology to think of ways to engage with intermediaries who work to amplify, aggregate, and put together community voices. And this means that it's a component of training and capacity building, but also significantly recognizing that you want to amplify voices as a group. So having ways to file complaints in mass, or bulk upload applications, and not always see the individual as the only lens might be one way to go forward.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting, Saryu. So, what I hear you say is that technology has a role. So it's not to say technology doesn't have a role, but the person who accesses the technology intervention could be the community leader. And it's really interesting you say that, because I was chatting with someone who had set up a grievance redressal system, and he said the people using it most were not people directly using it, but representatives of the people who were using it, including elected representatives. So that was really interesting, actually.
Absolutely. And a lot of these leaders, community leaders or political intermediaries, they have the phone numbers of the people in the municipality. I mean, they chat on WhatsApp and they have that direct connect. So it's much more likely that they are the ones doing the contacting. But sorry, I had a question.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Saryu. And let me, just get Aniket into the discussion. So Aniket, Hakdarshak has actually played a fairly central role in helping citizens avail, of government support and welfare benefits. What do you think are the challenges that citizens face in the process of accessing welfare benefits in general? And in particular, what would you say are the experiences, with reference to an urban worker, particularly the migrant urban worker?
So I think the majority of the challenge lies in the information itself. Citizens are not aware of the exact eligible schemes that there are. Government has so many eligibility rules. Eligibility criteria of schemes literally works like a probability theorem. If you belong to this caste or this income or disability or domicile, then you'll get this scheme. Also, a large challenge tying up to the things that Rajiv and Sarayu said. One is essentially identifying the political economy around schemes, right? If you are not a voter for the local community, it's very difficult to mobilize that local community to get schemes. Let's take the example of rural India, right? Like the closest point to get schemes is the Gram Panchayat and Gram Sevak. The parallel in the urban community is the corporator. But the corporator is not going to work for you if you're not the voter. So the voting becomes very important. Second big challenge that we see is that, there is the using the local community, using the technology. So technology alone is not the solution, but the enablers to technology involving the local community in pushing this information, ensuring that the entitlements are received by urban community. So including the documents, including the schemes. So that becomes a huge challenge and a huge gap which needs to be fulfilled. Another thing is that identifying the different documentation, something that has already been discussed earlier, is around the domicile. So that becomes extremely important. Some of the schemes that were announced yesterday as well, right? One nation, one ration card, which can be a huge push. But then there will be a pull and push on the federal system of the country. You're taking away more rights from the states. So how do you counter that? right? Similarly, if there is going to be more push on getting, ideally using technology, getting a government welfare scheme should be as easy as getting a bank transfer. If I'm sitting in Himachal, my bank account is in Pune, I should be able to get that bank transfer. I shouldn't have an issue. But what becomes a challenge is taking away those rights from the local, state, local government, because they are looking at welfare economics primarily around voting, politics. How does that? How do those families get the benefits, and they can claim the benefits later, have been pushed by those political parties or resources. So I think that becomes a huge challenge in the urban communities. Also, some of the other schemes that are being pushed now on the point of roti kapda makan, right? The rental, the getting migrant workers and construction workers rental accommodation. So that also there is no tied up benefit to the construction company. What are the incentives to the company? What are the incentives to the supplier? What is the incentive to the entire supply chain? You are asking on a construction site for the construction company to set up rental accommodation for migrant workers, which makes a lot of sense. But what is the government subsidy around it? What is the long-term planning around it? How is that land going to be monetized later? Unless and until those stakeholders are brought in, we are going to do piecemeal solutions because there is a crisis right now. There is no long-term planning or thinking around the basic universal rights of all urban migrants. Can we think of, for example, a national urban employment guarantee program? Just like you have the rural employment guarantee program. But what will it look like? What are the stakeholders? What are the challenges? It's going to involve more people on the supply side of things and a lot of voice from the migrants itself. We need people who can use technology, who are part of the urban migrant ecosystem, not people coming from outside and using technologies, using data sets and using helplines and coming in and saying that we'll solve a problem. It has to be people who can use those tools and data sets on their own and access all these government services, financial services, private services through their own smartphones. So yeah.
Yeah. No, thanks for that, Aniket. You did mention, the incentive structures of various people in the ecosystem. And I was curious, you've done some pilots on BOCW fund and getting access for construction workers. So I was curious that, let's say contractors as a community, what incentive structure could work for them to actually get, people enlisted under the BOCW fund?
So I think number one, any subcontractor or contractor on a given week employs on large sites 400, 500, sometimes thousands workers. What we need to realize is that they only have about 50 to 100 of these workers on roll, which means they'll get their ESI, PF, all the labor law compliance done. The remaining 700, 800 workers are deliberately kept on a daily wage system, which are called NACA workers who are brought in. So one is acknowledging that fact, because the economics of the construction business doesn't allow for 800 people to be on, put on roll on all those benefits. So sometimes, I'm just saying that whether it's right or wrong, if you just acknowledge that and say, okay, what can we first do for the contractor, for those 100 people that they are willing to onboard? That is number one. So they have a certain percentage who they are willing to give ESI, who they are willing to give PF, who they are willing to do skilling schemes, who they are willing to invest on a creche on the site. Then there are, because contractors are also micro entrepreneurs themselves, there are some schemes for them. They want to avail of loans. They want to know what tax subsidies they can get, what other incentives they can get from banks. So I think getting them incentives can get them on board. And then I think we can move ahead and look at the other workers as well. So I think that's something, an approach that we have tried on sites, some of the sites that we have worked, and it has worked in the sense that it has allowed us to bring in more innovations, more local partners on that site. So the willingness and openness has been built. So I think just like any work, we need to acknowledge the stakeholders that are there. And the biggest stakeholder in construction, for example, is the contractor. It is not the builder, the brand. So if you have a big brand, they are just the investors. They are not the actual contractors. So it's the local contractor who we need to build strong, and rather than pushing them in a corner and saying you're non-compliant, let's first work with them. What are you willing to be compliant on? And then build on it. Because they are not, I feel, brought on board on a lot of the programs that are tried out on construction sites. by different partners. I mean, by different stakeholders in the community.
Right. No, thanks, Aniket. That was really useful. And Sandeep, I was wondering if you could also share your own experience about how to get stakeholders invested into what you're trying to do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, sure. Thanks, Shilpa. It's great to be here with you, Rajiv, Saryu, and Aniket. Before I jump into that, can I just set the context in terms of delivery and what we're trying to do? And then maybe I can come to your question. So as you said, we have been helping workers who have lost their hands or fingers in accidents in factories in Gurgaon, right? So for the past 3 years, we've helped something like 2,500 of these workers. Now, what have we learned from them or from there is this, that although as ESIC registered workers, these are meant to be formal, 2/3 of them did not have their ESIC card until the day of the accident, which in effect meant they were informal, right? 90% of them odd are migrants. 90% of factories we believe in Gurgaon where we work are not registered. So part of the equation that we are dealing with here is there are a lot of migrant workers that we want to work with, and this equation of employer-employee that Rajiv talked about, although it should be informal, as structured by law, is sitting in informal, right? Now, before solutioning the issue that comes to me, having moved from corporate sector to social sector, is this, that people like me for decades have taken wrong decisions. We have not helped the situation. And the answer lies, in my mind, number one, in influencing those leaders, people like me in the past or today's leaders or future leaders, is changing the way they take decisions. I think everything else to me sounds like a bit of a tinkering, honestly, right? And what do I mean by that is, never in my career, anybody ever in any board questioned me what were the externalities of the decisions I was taking. It could be $1 billion investment. Nobody would ask me what happens to environment or people as a result of this outside. So how do I influence that? How do we influence that, right? The answer, I think social sector has done it very well in many areas, is first, I think all of us, as you're doing today, need to talk about this problem much, much more, not just COVID time. If you see the media before COVID, hardly any mainstream media carried news of workers. Hardly any journalist is left on worker beat. There is no more thing called worker beat anymore, apparently, right? So how do you keep this top of mind in future, to me, is really important for changing the minds of stakeholders. And that means leaders in the government, that means leaders in the private sector who are making these big decisions. And that's really important to me. Otherwise, we are tinkering. Now, how do we go about influencing and what lessons we draw from there? I think one is evidence. All of us try bringing evidence. So for us, it was 1,000 workers having lost their hands and fingers just in auto sector supply chain in 2 years that we were tracking it, right? So we took it to the boards of auto sector and we said, this is really happening in your supply chain and you are accountable. So finding the end of the commercial chain, which is in this case, the brand owners, to me is a big influencing piece, because if they decide to improve their supply chains, if they decide to improve the human rights and environment in their supply chain, it is a much more effective strategy than people coming from the side, right? So the corporate sector, in my mind, has a huge role to play, because I believe that in today's world, corporates are much more powerful than governments. So we've got to influence corporates, right? How do you influence corporates? To me, it's about awareness. It's about reminding them of issues. It's about media playing a role which is not temporary like right now. It's a long-term role. Media needs to invest in it. Who will support that media becomes another question. Why would you buy that newspaper becomes another question, right? So there is this piece about information that needs to be put out there. Then when it comes to the worker community, and I think others have said it, ultimately people have to demand their rights. Ultimately, they have to push their cause. Communities have to work together to push their agenda. In migrant communities, it's more of an issue because these people are migrants. They're moving in and out all the time, right? How do you create communities? What we see in Gurgaon is in one way to look at these communities, there is a Bihari colony, there is an Assami colony, there is a Bangladeshi colony. People are staying by states, right? So Can we create a system where these communities are empowered with knowledge, with information, with their rights, where they're demanding some of this stuff? And that actually is, the challenge with that is that Indian health indicators are some of the worst in the world. Our social indicators are worse than China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, you name it, right? How do you make people who have been malnourished for the first 5 years of their lives demand their rights? So this needs a systemic solution, which brings the role of the government. And all these announcements yesterday, some of them sound great to me, right? If the detail is worked out and it is actually implemented on the ground, that is important. So the second message I'll leave here to answer to your question, and I'll stop after that, is we look at ESIC scheme. We help workers get employees, state insurance corporations, insurance for healthcare and compensations, right? We have got them about 17 crores of compensation. Now, we don't charge workers for that at all, which is really important, right? What have we learned out of that is this. The service delivery from the government does not work in many cases because, one, people are just not aware. We ran a quiz on asking the simplest question in ESIC, which is this. How many of you know that ESIC registration needs 10 staff in your organization? That includes the owner if he's paid and manager, everybody else, right? 80% did not know that answer. 80% of workers. 340 people, I think, participated in that. Now, if people don't even know what the scheme is and how it works for them, how are they going to use it, right? And then the second thing is, the way the government runs schemes, unfortunately, is much worse than private sector. And I'm not a privatizer, on the contrary. However, you have to learn from private sector, right? In private sector, you have constantly people working on customer experience. How do you improve customer experience? You have government schemes, on the other hand, where there is a perverse economy that the worse the scheme is communicated, the less it is used, the less work there is for the government and its staff, and the more profitable or the more cash they can retain, right? So if pensions in ESIC are a very difficult thing to get, if maternity benefits in ESIC are a very difficult thing to get, well, people won't take it. If people won't take it, there is less work to do and there is a lot of profits. So last year, ESIC had 9,000 crores extra profits. So I'll stop there, but I think those two are the big things that I would like to put out.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that, Sandeep. I have a follow-on question, which is, you mentioned get the brands into it. But the fact of the matter is that in a lot of industries, especially industries which employ a lot of people, it's not, in a sense, bulk of the industry may not be with brands. It might be with unbranded players. So how do you, tackle that part of the industry?
Very good question, Shilpa, and we have been trying to do that. And I think there is no perfect answer to this, but the way I look at it is as follows. When there was a burning platform in Bangladesh because of the fire in Rana Plaza where 400 workers died in a fire, right? The clothes brands all over the world, especially the US and Europe, right, had to go into Bangladesh to start improving ground conditions in those factories. They haven't succeeded 100%, but the move has begun and it is already on the right track and factory conditions have improved. When we look at our own work in Gurgaon, where there are 3 large auto sector brands, and I'll not name them, and their boards are engaged with us. We have got chairman of one of the largest companies interacting with us. We believe that if the issue is put to them in the right way, constructive way with solutions, then they are willing to look at their supply chain where, as you say, majority of the manufacturing is happening. 70% of the accidents that come to safe in India come from tier 2, 3, 4 of brands, not the brand factory, not even the next one, but the ones after that. But the fact is, at least one of the largest brands in the country is working with us to improve safety in that supply chain because some solutions are not too difficult. And I think it's an important point. It looks very difficult. It looks like economics won't work for it. It looks like this is out of their hands, but not so. Just 52% of accidents in this chain happen on power press. Power press accidents can be stopped by putting a sensor on the power press or some good practices. If we can just do that in just power press supply chain, 1/3 of the accidents can be stopped. Now, this is something people who are engaging with us are willing to work on it because it's a practical solution. So I think one way to engage with brands, and there are several, of course, there are investors in them that one can talk to, right? There are other stakeholders around them which one can talk to. But the point is that one also needs to have practical solutions which can work, and you start from there.
Right. So thanks, Sandeep. I actually want to, throw one question out to both Rajiv and then yourself, which is that, to a lot of service delivery in terms of welfare benefits, especially to the migrant worker, requires coordination between two states, the state where they work and the state where they're coming from. Rajiv, what are your thoughts on what we should be doing here going forward? And then also Sandeep, if you can.
Yeah. So very good question. And Shilpa, one of the big things to do now, big ticket things to do, is to universalize, is to not create state boundaries to access to services. And today technology platforms exist to help doing that. Financing instruments are available to make sure that if a person is getting, entitlement from here, is not duplicating kind of access in another location. Universalization is key, absolutely key to leaving it on the political whims of coordination between two states. This one is BJP state, this one is Congress state. Inki banegi, nahi banegi. Leave that aside. By law, universal access must be opened out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which means that PDS should be universalized, subsidized housing should be universalized, healthcare should be universalized. People, regardless of where they belong, should be able to access it. So and this gets federal, legislative endorsement, and not be left to interstate coordination committees, which should be run by fatigued bureaucrats, and things may or may not happen then.
Right. Yeah. Sandeep, do you want a quick word on this?
Sure. Thanks, Shilpa. I agree with Rajiv. I think that is the answer. I'll also talk a little bit about a practical solution in migration state. So when we look at Gurgaon as an example, there's an area called IMT, right, which is the industrial center there. Model town, apparently. There is nothing model about it. But one thing that occurs to me as a simple solution, and we have been trying to push it with states of UP, Bihar, and Orissa for the past year, but they haven't listened to us. We hope that they listen to us now with all this trauma that we have heard and seen, is why can't they set simple migrant centers where any migrant who moves in, and Rajiv knows more about source, we work in destination. Why can't every worker who moves into a destination town like Gurgaon register there, get some sort of an identity card, which may not be a citizenship card, because I know that's a long-term game, right? Get some basic skill assessment, get some basic certification if that is required. And if these kind of things are supported from both states, because there is vested interest, for one, it is a voter bank, source state, and for other, it is a very useful, productive resource, which, as Rajiv said, has to be recognized. And I think now businesses are recognizing, and they're losing workers, and they're saying, capture them before they go away. I mean, this is ridiculous, but that's what's happening, right? They recognize now, if we can create a system which is very practical and simple in these locations, where one can get a bit of an identity, a little bit of skill assessment, a job center maybe where there is a centralized job inventory coming from various people, it's not difficult to do. And I think that would be a good start in times to come as migrants start coming back into these towns.
Right. No, thanks for that. I think we have a final 5 minutes left. And Sarju, let me start, with you to ask the closing question. If you had, to make one recommendation to improve the quality of service delivery or welfare benefit delivery for informal workers, what would that one recommendation be? And after you, I'll throw this to each of the other panelists. Yeah.
Sure. I think very clearly, I come from a lens of saying, recognize the way in which social structures already operate. And I think all of the panelists have spoken to that in some measure. One is that Migration particularly is highly intermediated. There are the mestries, they're called contractors. The contractors are called mestries here in Karnataka, and equivalents, I'm sure, across. So to recognize that, for instance, migration is highly intermediated, slum life is highly intermediated, that social structures like caste and class do play a role in how you do speak to people who belong to the state or whatever else. But that recognition is a fundamental starting point. And I think tied into that recognition that whatever policies are made must reflect the social reality is the idea of technology. And technology can play a significant role. And I think both Rajiv and Sandeep made the point. Migrants are mobile. Technology doesn't have or recognize state boundaries. And so why is welfare now solely the domain of the state? So there is a case for universalization, of course, considering the questions of exclusion which naturally appear when you think of any kind of delivery of technology. So being able to recognize the role of technology in addressing some of these concerns around welfare particularly is very, very useful. Now, having said that, in considering both the reality of society as well as the role of technology, is sort of bringing the two and saying that in what instances do people interact individually versus in what instances do they interact as a community. So I think being able to recognize that difference and design thoughtfully and not just deploy the same thing everywhere would be critical. So I think that would be my takeaway. And I think that speaks both to the broader concerns of urban informality, which is closely linked with migration, but more specifically what we're seeing now in today's day and age in the context of COVID around sort of the circularity, the lack of the permanent claim in the urban areas for migrants. Like urban immigrants don't really have that permanent stake or claim, but recognizing that when they do come in, they come in through the help of somebody in their community to work. And so what role can this person play both in supporting their voice as well as in helping them use technology more meaningfully? So I think being able to recognize, bring together the various realities and the facilities of technology and the realities of social structure is what I would definitely say is a takeaway on this.
Yeah. Aniket, would you like to go next?
Yeah. I think for basically pushing urban entitlements to urban migrants, I think three things are important. One is scaling up information in local language and through a lot of local tools, easy to understand information, which is bases their profile. So not like bombarding them with a lot of information of entitlements, but specific to their profile. Essentially getting very specific with the information using tools that urban migrants use, which are a lot of video tools. So getting the first thing would be the right information, the correct information for their entitlements, both at destination and at source. Second would be to invest a lot on local leadership so that the coordination on applications, the coordination on last mile can be done from within the urban migrant leadership. So building that kind of leadership which we have been able to demonstrate as a system that has been possible in rural, I think it's also possible in urban by giving them the right kind of leadership. And the third is giving options and choice. So we've already mentioned using technology, looking at welfare benefits more as services like financial services, services like banking, remittance, all the other things, but also when it comes to simple schemes like healthcare, right? Like I am in Himachal, there is an Ayushman Bharat, there is a HimCare scheme. There are two schemes. Now it should be a choice which I want to opt for. First step would be information. Second step would be who's going to get me the information. Third step has to be a simple choice. What is it that I want to opt for? Whether I'm in Shimla, whether I'm in Delhi, whether I'm in Chandigarh, it doesn't matter. If I'm eligible for this particular healthcare scheme, and universalization of certain central government schemes has happened. It is not like it hasn't happened right now, or it will not happen in the future as well. But I think what definitely we need to realize is that execution still remains a state subject. So for the longest time, West Bengal hasn't taken up Ayushman. Punjab took up Ayushman in February this year. For 1.5 years, PM Awas Yojana was not taken up by Madhya Pradesh, even though in 2017-18, 418,000 homes were built in Madhya Pradesh in election year when BJP was in power. Whatever we do, Whatever is a universalized central government program, whether it's Ujjwala, whether it is Chandhan, whether it is healthcare, we have to recognize and coordinate with the state. I think universalization of schemes and the federal economy and the federal structure of the country go hand in hand.
Yeah. Thanks, Aniket. Sandeep?
Thanks, Shilpa. Since this is the time to think opportunities, and everybody is thinking opportunities, one thing that comes to my mind often, and I'm not an expert at this, so I may end up sounding like a fool, but in rural areas we have this Narega kind of a thing for employment. What I see is that in urban centers, there's going to be a lot of unemployment. Right now, still people like us and government are feeding them. It's fine for a period of time, but that cannot be sustained. A lot of people, we interviewed a number of people yesterday, they want to stay back. Yesterday's number was 30% of workers that we interviewed wanted to stay back in towns, even if they didn't have jobs. I'll come with final data in a couple of days. What will happen to these people, I just don't understand, right? They are not just going to be a drain on the system, but they are going to create all sorts of other, or it may end up with other kind of issues. They need employment, they need to be busy. And I sometimes think whether we need a Narega kind of scheme for urban centers, whether we should employ thousands and thousands of, maybe lakhs of these people into doing things like clean up the city, clean up these urban centers, clean up drains, grow trees. These rental accommodations don't have water supplies, get the water supplies in there, improve the living conditions of people. Can we employ all these people with, of course, government subsidies, and maybe private sector will come to sponsor some of this, because it sounds like a perfect CSR opportunity for local large corporates. Why can't we have, for example, in Manesar, good Maruti Hero Honda saying, and government saying, let's spend a few crores and several crores on employing all these people for 1 year to make this place better to live and work. Just a thought.
Yeah, thanks, Sandeep. Rajiv, we let you have the last word.
I am going to be somewhat provocative. I think the state of services and access will improve if we decide as a society and an economy to do away with informality. Why have we accepted it as a reality of our economic, framework? It is when urban informality transitions to urban formality, which means when people have written contracts, they have social security, they have rights that they can enforce in the legal arena, when they have healthcare, they have leaves, they have benefits. It is at that point that the relationship with the city will stand permanently modified. It is the informal nature of their employment that creates subservience in a city environment. And till we question that, we cannot take informality as given, as permanent. That seems to be the case. 93% of our entire workforce is unorganized and informal. How can we live with that number? There's informality growing in the formal sector. I think it is that that needs to be challenged, changed with whatever we do. And it is till that happens, I don't think the providers, the government or the industries or the employers are going to, we can very easily go back to business as usual, Shilpa, because the fundamental nature of our workers' relationship with the economy will not stand changed. That needs to change.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think we've had great discussions, powerful thoughts there. There were more questions from the audience. I think we'll commit to sending an email reply to those questions that we couldn't answer. Let me kind of summarize my takeaway. I think we started with Rajiv saying the in-between people. So people who neither belong to one place nor another. And also the commentary that it is welfare on the one hand, and then the politics and economics of the welfare on the other hand. And I think the some of the important takeaways for me, at least, is at a design level post-COVID. Can we think of design from the government in a boundaryless way? Can we take some facts into account? I mean, acknowledging the facts was a point well made. The facts of who the migrant workers are, the facts of who the stakeholders are, and can we take their own, the points of view of all the stakeholders also on board and engage them into this discussion. A very important point was really in the end, maybe what is earned is not enough to manage lives, and therefore what do we do in terms of food, a PDS solution, in terms of housing, a solution for part-time shelter, and how do we not maybe criminalize spaces which are occupied by some portions of the workforce. I think those were some thoughts. There were also some important ones to do with involving community leaders, leaders from within the communities which the labor force came from. The role of information, the role of awareness, local language-based, profile-based. And then there was some, big thoughts, thoughts to do with informality as an accepted way of work, implications thereon, some big thoughts in terms of, can we have a job employment scheme in urban cities targeted at actually making cities better for everybody. I think that was a lot to pack into a 50-minute discussion. Thank you all for joining, and I'm sure we'll continue the dialogue going forward. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you, Shilpa, for your moderation. And thank you, audience, for coming and being here with us. This session was put together by WRI India and the Media Network India Group. Just wanted to flag that the plenary session will start at 2. That will be Professor Mohammad Yunus, and it will be followed by a plenary session by Rupa Kurwa of Media Network India. So do join us for that. It will be really interesting. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you in the next session. I'm gonna idle a little bit so that everyone can read the questions. There is, of course, some learning in the questions also. And then I will close this window in about a couple of minutes. Okay, great. I'm going to be exiting the session now, which means that this live video will stop, and of course the Zoom session will stop too. And I will hopefully see you at the plenary. Thank you all. Bye-bye.